Hey, what's up, everybody? Welcome to another episode of Simply Cyber Live, where we're diving deep into the world of cybersecurity with some of the most influential figures in our industry. I'm your host, Dr. Gerald Ozier, and tonight we have an incredibly special guest joining us, somebody who I have been looking, inspired by for years and years and years and years. Our guest this evening is the distinguished in the field of cybersecurity, Dr. Ron Ross. He's a computer scientist and one of only 30 fellows at the National Institute of Standards and Technology. That's right, NIST, baby. And if you are a squad member, do use the I Heart NIST emotes. Just spam it if you want, because it's the perfect episode for it. He's got a focus on computer and information security, system security engineering, security architecture, trustworthy systems, cyber resilience, security assurance, privacy risk management, and I just found out AI, which he studied in his PhD. He's authored numerous. When I say numerous, like he's probably forgot some of the ones that he's authored more than papers I've written, right? On NIST security standards, guidelines. They're used widely by federal, state, local, as well as private sector. Just so much impact. Dr. Ross currently leads the NIST System Security Engineering project, developing security standards and guidelines for the federal government, contractors, and U.S. critical infrastructure. Hello. He also supports the U.S. State Department in international cybersecurity outreach and its critical infrastructure protection. Now, throughout his career, which has spanned over 30 years, Dr. Ross has held significant roles, including project leader for the Joint Task Force, and a little thing you may have heard, the FISMA implementation project. He was director of the National Information Assurance Partnership and had several leadership and technical positions during his 20-year military career, including serving as a White House aide and senior technical advisor to the Department of the Army. As if that wasn't enough, as if he couldn't just pick one of those and dominate a cocktail party, his accolades continue to blow my mind. He was inducted into the National Cybersecurity Hall of Fame. He's a 5-time recipient of the Federal 100 Award. He's gotten the Presidential Rank Award. Ron, you're killing it, man. He's got the Department of Commerce Gold and Silver Medal Awards and many, many others. Okay. The mantle above his fireplace is only so long, people. So the rest kind of go in a drawer over there. Tonight, we're going to be discussing his recent project that he delivered on time and under budget, I might add, the NIST Special Publication 800-171 Rev 3 and the NIST Special Publication 800-171A Rev 3. Ladies and gentlemen, I am super stoked. That intro was long, but it was absolutely warranted. Please, as always, remember this is a community event. We bring these guests on to educate, inspire, and just provide, their experiences. So ask questions if you have them. Drop the Oprah emotes in chat because we are a community. Also found out Dr. Ron Ross is a hashtag team lurker or team passive observer on the morning threat briefs, and we'll get into that a little bit later. But please join me in welcoming the very distinguished Dr. Ron Ross to the show. Let's go get him. Dr. Ross, how are you, my man?
I'm doing great, Jerry. It's great to be with you tonight. I've been a long time watcher of your shows. In fact, I was just telling you before we started that you're actually my morning alarm clock. 8 o'clock in the morning, my smartphone dings and it's your show going live with your updates. So thank you for doing that.
Yeah, no, it's my pleasure. We are a community service, Ron, not just delivering the top cyber news, but also providing alarm clock services like a hotel. So we're happy to do that.
Yeah, it's much appreciated.
I love it. I love it so much. Thank you for joining us today. And I love everybody in chats just dropping all the emotes. It's so good. So, Ron, just kind of diving right in. Can you, you just published this 800-171 and 171A, the NIST special pubs. Can you share some of the unique challenges and breakthroughs that you dealt with 171? And what do you think kind of the larger impact is that people in chat right now should know about this work that you did?
Well, the 171 is an interesting document. It actually started back in 2015, right around the time of the OPM breach. And as many of the folks on know today from on this live stream, Much of the work in 80171 comes from our standard, our gold standard, NIST 853. That's where all the core security controls that are part of the NIST risk management framework. But that catalog is large. It's got controls for 20 families, and it's got thousands of controls and control enhancements. For 80171, it was a special task. We had a tall order because an executive order in 2010 signed by President Obama said that the National Archives and Records Administration had to get a handle on all the different data types in the federal government. We had literally thousands of different data types, and it became a problem, especially after 9/11, when we were looking at the communication between agencies was not always the best. We were calling different things the same name, different names, and the data types weren't very standardized. So NARA had two tasks. They had to standardize the data types within the federal government, and they came up with 82 categories and subcategories originally that they call controlled unclassified information. So if you look at the feds, we have basically 3 buckets of information and data. One is classified, that's controlled by statute. The second bucket is called controlled unclassified information, and that has the 82 categories. Could be contract information, intellectual property, health records, PII, you name it. It's all part of the CUI suite of data standards. And then we have everything else, which is kind of if it's not classified, it's not CUI, then it's kind of the other bucket. It still needs protection, but it's just not all that critical. So in the federal government, NARA set the protection level at the moderate baseline, which is kind of the mid-level in the NIST risk management framework. But that brings in literally hundreds of controls because the moderate baseline covers the 3 pillars of cyber: confidentiality, integrity, and availability. But the executive order was only concerned with unauthorized disclosure of CUI. So we had to do what we call tailoring. Mm-hmm. We took the moderate baseline and FIPS 200, which is kind of our flagship high-level set of security requirements. That was one of the first pubs we developed back in 2006. And we had to tailor down till the requirements were simple and they covered only the essential parts of that moderate baseline, because all of those requirements now were going to be pushed out to the private sector, into the non-federal organizations. So you've got contractors, you've got academic institutions, you've got research organizations. They all have some kind of relationship with the government, either a contractual relationship or an agreement. And we're throwing our controlled unclassified information over the fence into those other environments. So we were concerned about how does that information get protected once it's over the fence outside of our direct control. That was the genesis for NIST 80171. And in 2015, we published the document. It's been around almost a decade before we did a major update this year. And of course, the major update, we can get into some of the details, but the primary reason for the update was, since everything in 80171 is sourced back to 853, in 2020, we had a major update of NIST 853 revision 5. So we had to bring the SP 80171, those security requirements, up to code with the current version of 853. And the other thing we discovered is we tried to make those requirements very simple and straightforward. You can notice they're very short. They don't look a lot like 853. And it introduced a lot of confusion in the non-federal, the private sector, basically, because the requirements were at such a high level. There was a lot of confusion on how to implement the requirements. What were you getting out of the requirements? And then the assessors didn't really have a clear vision of how to assess those requirements to see if they were in compliance, or if in the world of controls, are the controls implemented correctly, operating as intended, and producing the desired effect. So that, for all those reasons, we started a major update in 2022. And just this past week, we published our first 2 installments of the update project. It's 171 and the corresponding assessment guideline. So that's kind of where we are right now.
Yeah, and I know a lot of federal contractors are definitely interested in the 171. Basically because they're going to have to comply with it effectively. With the 171, now in Rev 3, and I'll be in full disclosure, I haven't read it. I mean, it just came out. I haven't read it yet. But, with one of the things that NIST does with the cybersecurity framework that I love is that it's more outcome based instead of more prescriptive control based. So in 171, I know you were saying people were confused on how to achieve kind of the control or the objective and be able to measure it and determine if it was in place or not. With 171 Rev 3, I mean, did you guys get more prescriptive? Is that one of kind of those structural underpinnings that you included?
Yeah, you have to really distinguish between frameworks and controls and requirements. So why the cybersecurity framework works is because it is a higher level. It talks about the functions, the categories and subcategories, and you notice that after the subcategory level in the cybersecurity framework, you then have a choice of 5 different control sets, everything from ISO 27001 to the NIST controls to the CIS controls across the board. So controls and requirements always get to a lower level of detail because at the end of the day, frameworks are great, but they operate at 30,000 foot level. That's why people use frameworks to communicate with the C-suite. People in the C-suite are concerned with one thing. This organization has a mission. I need to make sure we're successful to carry out that mission. Most of the senior executives don't know a lot about cybersecurity. They depend on all of the folks in your audience out here today who are cybersecurity professionals. They're the ones that have to actually implement the safeguards and the countermeasures. And that typically goes from the top of the stack all the way down to the implementation at the operating system and down to the integrated circuits out to the network. So you have to, at some point, those high level requirements have to be broken down to the point where they're implementable. And, that's where the adversary typically can get the best of us because everything depends on a good implementation of the requirements or the controls. And so that's why one of the concerns that we heard from the outside world looking at all the NIST documents in the pubs is they said, you've got too many frameworks, too many things to deal with. And so we said 171 is really tied to 853. So we've made a commitment to transition the language in 171 back to the source language in 853. So what we're doing and what you're seeing in 171 revision 3 is the first step toward building what we call a CUI overlay. Mm-hmm. An overlay is where you take the basic controls in the moderate baseline, for example, and you tailor those, which means you can add some, you can throw some out, and you tailor for specific missions and business operations. So for example, an organization may build a space overlay or an overlay for the classified community, or you could build an overlay for manufacturing systems. The cybersecurity framework has a similar construct. Mm-hmm. What that means is when you look at a catalog like 853 it by definition has to be broad and deep. We've got to give our customers every appropriate safeguard and countermeasure to counter those threats that we know have either already been launched against us or could be launched in the future. But you can't expect any organization to implement every control or enhancement in the catalog. And that's why tailoring is a very critical part of the equation. And the other thing that we introduce in our catalog is this notion of organization-defined parameters. So, for example, we have a control that says, thou shalt back up your systems. Well, how often should I back those systems up? Every hour, every week, every month? Well, that depends on the organization. If you're at NASA and you have to have real-time backups because the information is time sensitive, then that's going to be what's going to complete that requirement of that control. But if you're another organization that maybe has very seldom updates, maybe once a month or every 2 weeks is plenty time for those backups. So tailoring allows you to specialize to make sure those requirements and the controls really speak to the organization and the mission that you're involved with. And that's always, at the end of the day, cybersecurity, we live for one thing, to make sure our mission owners are successful. And a lot of people miss that. They think it's all about cyber. In reality, cyber only matters if the mission is successful.
Yeah, we're here to enable the business or the mission, right, as it were, for sure. And I appreciate that. I mean, I can tell you, because I've worked a lot with FISMA, right? So which means I've done a lot of RMF and I've done a lot of 853. And it's always funny when you see like not junior people, but people newer to it, when they're reading a control and there's like multiple org defined value brackets in there. And they're like, where do I get these values from? It's like, well, that's the work. That's the work. We gotta go talk to the business about that, right? And figure out what their mission needs are. So Ron, with 171, coming out, and I know it's going to be essentially, ultimately, it's going to be required by businesses that are doing work with the DoD and, federal agencies and whatnot. But for the larger, broader picture, because it can be voluntarily adopted if you want, right? How do you see like the changes that you included in Rev 3 kind of impacting federal contractors and really the broader cybersecurity landscape in general?
This is a tough question because it's actually a very good question because we get this all the time. I think we have to set the landscape here. Even if we never had FISMA or the executive order on CUI, the adversaries wouldn't go away. The adversaries are, they're after lots of important things in our critical systems. And when I talk about critical systems, that goes beyond the public sector, the federal agencies. It goes deep into the private sector. Every industry, every business is critical in its own right. And the adversaries are after your intellectual property. They would like to, in some cases, bring down your capability. Sometimes they install malicious code so they can trigger an attack at a time of their choosing. This is why we're very concerned with our adversaries pre-positioning malicious code in our power plants and things where they could bring down the grid. So even if we never had FISMA or never had any of the executive orders or OMB policies, you still have to live in a world of the cyberspace world today, which is very hostile and threatening. And in that regard, protecting your systems is really job number one, because everything today that we do, we're pushing computers into everything that matters. If you think about it, when we started cybersecurity 40 years ago, we basically had information technology systems. They were these big systems in the enterprise. And then over time, we had these things called operational technology. Those SCADA systems, industrial control systems, and power plants. And then we had IoT devices, Alexa, all those things, the devices, the smartphones, the tablets. The common denominator in every one of those, whether it's a supercomputer, IT, OT, IoT, or IIoT, the common denominator is they all have computers embedded, and they're driven by software and firmware. And it's largely untrustworthy software and firmware. Now, the thing that makes this problem so vexing and compelling and why it's so difficult and challenging, and this is why I give a shout out every time I do one of these podcasts or webinars to the community of people who are your followers. I call these the cybersecurity professionals. They're the ones who get up every day. You can never pay them too much. They do the heavy lifting. It's frustrating. The life expectancy of a CISO is not that long because there's a lot of stress. They carry the entire burden of an organization on their backs because the cyber-physical convergence today, where you've got these computers embedded in all of these systems, the mechanical systems, like over 100 computers in your automobile that don't just control your entertainment system, they control your brakes. And cyber attacks now have demonstrated you can do anything to a computer from 10,000 miles away if it's not protected. So if you run a small business and you've got a cyber attack and you're put out of business for 3 or 4 days, that could be catastrophic, because in those 4 or 5 days where you're out of business, your customers may decide to go to your competition. And so that's why I say it's a good thing to take a look at 80171, even if you're not required to do so because you don't have a DoD contract. And again, every one of the NIST pubs outside of our standards, which are mandatory for the federal government, all of our special pubs are guidance documents. They don't become weaponized. I use the term weaponized because when the DoD puts a NIST pub in the DFAR, then it's part of a regulation, and that has the throw weight of a DoD reg behind it. But the NIST pub itself is not regulatory. We're not a regulatory organization. Our job is our scientists and engineers who are charged with doing one thing: produce the best cybersecurity standards and guidelines we possibly can for our customers, help them understand what's in the documents, how to implement effectively, and then be there to listen to their concerns over time so we can update these pubs and make sure we have the state-of-the-art safeguards, countermeasures, practices that our customers need to defend themselves in hostile cyberspace, which affects everybody today.
Yeah, I love that. Like 100%. Like I really feel like people need to get together and realize that, just because it's not required, like you should not be striving for minimum or, maximum compliance, right? So real quick shout out, Tyler Ramsby, dropping a super chat here for us, Ron. Great stuff.
Become best friends. Yep.
Great stuff. Thank you very much. We got the questions rolling in too, Ron. I'm going to ask you one question that just came in about 171, but I do want to kind of start going a little bit broader and wider. Professor Black Ops wants to know your thoughts on 171 for cloud CSPs. And
that kind of gets to your previous point. I think you were asking me, what's the thing that's really different about this Pub Rev 3? One of the requirements now deals with external service providers. So, we're protecting CUI, controlled unclassified information. So in the government side, we're doing that with the full force of the moderate baseline. Federal agencies know how to do that. But once it goes over the fence, that's the 171 territory. Now, what happens when we throw CUI over the fence and it lands in a contractors organization, and they're a small or medium-sized business? They decide to go to their managed service provider. And then from that CUI makes its way into the cloud. Well, we have a requirement now that says, in essence, if you're going to send our CUI, which we're concerned about, to another organization, then those requirements have to follow that CUI. And so you have to make sure that the requirements in 171 basically are going downstream to that second level service provider. And then you have to have evidence that they've actually complied with those requirements. So, the supply chain is broad and deep. So we're talking cloud service providers. What happens when that CUI makes it into the cloud or an MSP? Well, we have the FedRAMP program to deal with cloud. And that the theory behind that was, if you want to encourage federal agencies to use the new technology of the cloud, you've got to make sure that cloud service provider has done everything that the feds would do to protect the federal information when it's in the cloud. And so that spawned the FedRAMP program. Instead of having a separate evaluation every time a new agency wanted to use the cloud, you do it one time. The FedRAMP goes through a process. It goes through an ATO, a provisional ATO, and then an ATO. And then anybody that wants to use that service provider in the cloud knows that those controls have been implemented by that provider. Somebody has done an independent assessment, and they're vouching for the veracity of that cloud provider. So we have the same problem in a different way with the CUI and the 171. If it goes to the cloud, we have that same problem, and that introduces another level of complexity that we call, there's a kind of a matrix. It's a shared matrix responsibility, shared responsibility matrix. It basically says that if I'm a contractor and I decide to go to an MSP and I'm going to levy all the requirements in 171 on that provider, well, it isn't all the requirements. There's a kind of a shared responsibility. So I'll give you one example. Personnel security. In the federal government, we vet the people that work in the federal government. When the CUI goes over the fence to a contractors organization, there are requirements in 171 to do personnel security. Why? Because we're concerned about the people who work in that contractors organization. Now, what happens if that organization sends that information to an MSP or an MSSP or a cloud provider? Now we're concerned with the people in that cloud providers organization. You've got sysadmins up there, and if they're exposed to the information and it's not encrypted, maybe the keys are stored in the cloud, who's got access to the information 24/7? So there's kind of a chain of requirements and protections that need to follow the information, because ultimately we are responsible in the federal government for making sure that information is well protected, no matter where it is in that big supply chain, going from the top all the way down to the smallest part of that supply chain, mom and pop organizations sometimes.
Yeah, and we're seeing it more and more in the news, breaches related to supply chain attacks, data, being stored somewhere, especially with the proliferation of cloud SaaS solutions that make it wicked easy to spin things up and, just try things out. So you got Carl in accounting, trying to do something fancy and just pushing data out. It is a really tough nut to crack, because you can contractually bind people to comply with 171, right? And they can win the contract. But then downstream, like you said, to that MSP, it kind of gets a little murky and a little fuzzy. I feel like each iteration down, it gets more dim. Like the light gets dimmer and dimmer as you go further down the chain.
There's a problem too. The greatest threat that faces any of us today is, I call this the threat of complexity. It's complex hardware, software systems, trillions of lines of code, billions of devices, ubiquitous connectivity across the globe. And we're asking people to make sure that they can understand, reduce, and manage that complexity. You have to get smaller to actually do this level of protection because nobody can cover that level of complexity. Just for example, when you're developing code, even in a DevOps environment, you're bringing in code libraries. Most of the code library you'll never use, but maybe use one or two functions in that code library. We don't have a clue sometimes about who's been rumbling around in that code library. Did the adversaries plant malicious code in that library that I'm pulling into my system development lifecycle process? And with regard to some of the granularity requirements, what the two most important requirements or controls in the catalog, I still feel today, these are kind of foundational cybersecurity principles and concepts. Least functionality, least privilege. 4 words that are easy to say, but incredibly difficult to achieve. Least functionality, if you think about it, Jerry, how are most commercial products delivered today? Most vendors deliver the products wide open.
Oh my God. Yeah, I know.
Max functionality because that's what customers want from the vendor's perspective. But one example is a product that is looking at, we have in least functionality, we deal with minimizing ports, protocols, functions, and services to only those that are mission essential. So an example might be IPv6, IPv4. Some of the new products are being delivered with IPv6 fully enabled. You've got to shut it off. Now, if an organization is not paying attention, we break those down into individual pieces, ports, protocols, functions, services. Why do we do that? Because each one of those is important. And if you are delivered a product with IPv6 open and the organization fails to check that and disable that, the adversaries can get in through that basically that protocol that is unchecked. And once they have established the presence using IPv6, they can use that to gain credentials, privilege escalation, and then they're off and running. Mm-hmm. So this is the level of detail that it's all about implementation. And so you have to rigorously get involved with least functionality to make sure that your domain is something that you can actually protect, because nobody is smart enough or has enough resources to have a perimeter and a set of domain resources that are too large because it's undefensible. Least privilege goes without saying. The same principle. You want to only have people who have privileges that absolutely need to have those privileges to accomplish the mission. We violate that every single day.
Oh my God, definitely.
Just do those things. If you do just those 2 things to start with, and then do some 2-factor authentication and good access control and information flow control, and then manage your inventory of resources, hardware accountability, software accountability, and don't let programs execute without specific authorization. We used to call it whitelisting and blacklisting. Now those terms have now changed. They've morphed to different terminology, but the idea is only allow things to execute where you've given permissions to execute. And if we would just do those handful of things, you would eliminate 90% of these successful cyber attacks because they go for the low-hanging fruit. Yeah. They know most organizations have a soft underbelly, and why wouldn't you go there? That's the Willie Sutter said, why do I rob banks? Because that's where the money is. And it's the same principle with cybersecurity.
Oh my God, 100%. And it's so true. Like, just do the fundamentals. There's a reason that the fundamentals are the fundamentals, because they're highly effective. Ron, I don't know if you've ever read Dr. Ross Anderson, who recently just passed away, but he had a paper called The Economics of Information Security. I think it was like 2004, 2005. It's a phenomenal paper. I love it. And basically, he gets to what you're talking about. There's a perverse incentive in a capitalism society to get to market, because if you spend time, hardening it and making it, really secure, your competitors are going to get to market and sell first. And then consumers, when presented with 2 options, one that's full of friction and one that's frictionless, they're going to have a better experience that's frictionless. So you're incentivizing those vendors to push products that are essentially less secure, because that's what, they're profit driven. And it really, it goes into other stuff, but it really hits the nail on the head. And I felt like, I rail against this stuff all the time in the morning brief. When you see a story come and you're like, this is exactly what happened. Like, so it's killing me. It's killing me. Professor Black Ops, thanks for the super chat. He said thanks for the cloud answer. Now I want to kind of take it a little wide, if we can, for a hot minute here. A bunch of questions in chat. I was actually going to ask my own question, but I feel like chat's dropping questions. We should get into it. So, you have had an extensive career, Ron. Like, I listed all your accolades. You've been doing it for, decades now, and it's awesome. Just Ben wants to know, is there any advice that you would give your younger self to pay attention to or look out for? And I think it's like hashtag asking for a friend here on what things people should be keeping their eyes out if they're up and coming now into their career.
There's two things that, in fact, this kind of gets to the thing we were chatting about before I come on today. I'm a strong believer in mentoring. I was telling you the story, how I got into cybersecurity. I got into cybersecurity by accident. I was sent to the Naval Postgraduate School in 1985. I know that's a long time. Most of the people on this live stream weren't even born back then, but the Army sent me to grad school to get a PhD in computer science, specializing in artificial intelligence and robotics. I was going to be a program manager in the Army's autonomous vehicle program, the robots that would go on the battlefield and disarm explosives and all of that. The day before I graduated, I got a call from the Department of the Army, and they said, "Hey, the guy that is in that program management job right now, he just decided to extend for a year, so go find yourself something else to do." So here I am, I got my PhD in computer science and AI and robotics, and now I'm looking for a job. So I called up a friend of mine at the National Security Agency. I said, "You got any jobs over there?" He said, "We got tons of jobs." I show up October of, this was 1990. I knew nothing about cybersecurity. This has totally blindsided me. But what I tell young people is that you're going to have a lot of those blind sides. So invest in the fundamentals. What allowed me to go to NSA, first of all, I had to wait for 3 months to get in the building to get a top secret SCI clearance. But while I waited, I was able to go to a couple of companies, and I went to NIST, and they took me under their wing. And I had so many old-time graybeards take me in a room and just share their experiences and all of their wisdom with me. And I read every book I could on cybersecurity, but I had the foundation. I had, the engineering and the computer science courses. I understood everything from applications down to the operating system and out to the network of integrated circuits. How computers work is really fundamental at some level. Not if you're writing policies, but most of the people who are security engineers need to know what I call the essentials of the stack. But I had to learn everything about cybersecurity from the ground up. And there were so many people who were generous with their time. So that's the one thing I always tell young people: get grounded in the fundamentals, no matter what you choose to do in life, whether you're a cybersecurity professional, that's what you want to be, or whatever you want to be, a doctor, a lawyer, if you want to be an electrician. If you get grounded in the fundamentals, and the second thing is be a life learner. Just because you get that degree or that credential, that's never stop there. Treat every day like you know nothing and build on that knowledge base. And then the third thing, which is important now, later in my life, is to mentor those people who are coming up. In fact, I've tried to do that my whole career. When I go to a conference, I remember one young kid came up to me at a conference one time and he said, "Hey, I'm starting my PhD, but I don't know what to do. And would you mind spending some time with me?" So we sat down after the conference was over at 5 o'clock, and we just talked for an hour. He went away. I didn't hear from him for about 2-3 months. He called me back up. He said, "I've got my topic now for my PhD, and I'm going down the road." Over the next 2 years, he would check in every 6 months or so and tell me how he was doing. 2 years, I think it was 3 years later, called me up one day and said, "I just finished my PhD and now I've got it, and I'm going." It was so gratifying. And then the next day, there was a ring at my doorbell, a big box. I'm a huge NASCAR and a NASA fan. Those folks who know me know that. He sent me a road race set. It was a huge road race set because he knew I was a NASCAR fan. Now I'm a federal employee, so I looked at that and I had to see how much that cost, and it was over $100. So we can't accept gifts. So I had to call him up and say, "Hey, I love the thought, but I got to send it back." But this is the kind of gratitude. You invest an hour of your time with a young person, and you are really seeding the next generation to help them do the heavy lifting, what we were going to have to do to protect this country. And I think I was sharing with you, Jerry, before we came on about in Howard County. I spent 32 years in Howard County. I'm down in Florida now. I'm mentoring a high school student now. He would like to be a cybersecurity person. Now he's in the science and gifted and talented program. So I'm going to let him ride second seat on the 800-172 development project for the next year. Wow. And he's going to go through and sit side by side, and he's going to learn not only about the NIST process, but he's going to learn what kind of enhanced security requirements do we need to stop these hostile cyber attacks from the advanced persistent threat. It's not classified stuff we're doing. We're just building next-gen safeguards and countermeasures for our customers. So he's going to get a deep dive, and he's going to have the experience of his life. And, that's the kind of investment that I encourage everybody out there to make, because look at all of us we're going to move off the stage at some point. I'm 73 years old right now. I still have the passion that Jerry has. We were talking about your passion. I have that same passion. The problem is that the runway gets shorter as you get older. So, I have a sense of urgency now, not only to keep doing the work, but also to make sure that I'm seeding the next generation. So, that's not about the nuts and bolts of cyber, but it's some life lessons that I've learned. And, paying it forward is always a good idea.
Yeah. And, Ron, that's the spirit of the Simply Cyber community. People show up, people share resources. I always say too, like, don't think that you have to be like, you're obviously a very accomplished professional, right? With 30 plus years, lots of accolades and stuff. But even someone who's been in for 2 years, there's somebody who's got 0 years of experience who that 2-year person can help guide and shape and help with lessons learned. So we're always trying to promote that. It's like, it takes a village, right? And sharing that information. And, I have a similar story where I found out about cybersecurity, and I know this is your interview, but I want to share it with you. So I worked at Bearing Point, which was KPMG Consulting. I'm sure in the Beltway, you worked with them at some point. And found out about cybersecurity. I was a software developer at the Pentagon. And I got audited, of course, for FISMA, Ron. So this thing's full circle. And I failed miserably because I didn't have any auditing controls. My access controls were trash. And I was like, how could I have possibly failed? Like, I'm a great software developer. This is ridiculous. I was like 24, full of whatever, pride or whatever. And they're like, no, this stinks. So I look into FISMA. I'm like, whoa, this is cool. I opened the global address list, the GAL, in Outlook, sorted by manager and above, cybersecurity discipline, United States, got a list of 50 people. And I just started calling them one after another. And like the 8th guy was named Ray Sturby. And he spent an hour with me on the phone. And like that launched that, that's all I needed. And I was off and running. He gave me some things to go research. I took it, and the rest is, me today. So yeah, it's real.
And I think what you were saying earlier is so important. Everybody's got different aptitudes. There are people who are going to be really good at developing software and using secure coding techniques and memory safe programming languages. They're going to love that stuff. There'll be electrical engineers, there'll be computer engineers, and that aptitude, the STEM sciences are really important in a part of cybersecurity. But we also need people who know how to write policies. They know how to talk to the C-suite. I call those the people, they might be the middleware that can connect those technical people up to the C-suite. Everybody can play a role, and they're all important. The one story I never forget, and I'm a huge fan, as I told you, of NASA and NASCAR. And I tell the story about President Kennedy back in 1961. He gave that very influential speech that I use this concept to call the essential partnership. It's the government, industry, and the academic community. President Kennedy said in 1961, it was a very famous speech. He said, we're going to go to the moon and do other things by the end of this decade, not because they are easy, but because they are hard. We were in a hot missile race with the old Soviet Union. We were behind, and he challenged the best and the brightest of the American people to send a man to the moon by the end of the decade. Now, that was in 1961. On July the 20th of 1969, I had only been at West Point for 20 days, and we landed our first man on the moon with 1950s and 1960s computing technology. It was awesome. We couldn't even do two-factor authentication in the government for 13 or 14 years, but yet this is what you can do when you have a passion and a vision for doing the hard things. And make no mistake about it, the cybersecurity challenges that's the challenge of the 21st century. Everything we do depends on protecting this computing technology. I tell the story because when President Kennedy went to the NASA Space Center, he was walking down the hallway and he ran into a janitor pushing a broom. And the president said, what do you do here at NASA? And the janitor looked up to him and said, Mr. President, I'm helping put a man on the moon. Wow.
Yeah.
What that tells you all you need to know about an organization that has a vision and a mission and everybody's on board. Everybody's got a part to play. There's no role in cybersecurity that's too small or too insignificant. People may think they've got the most important job, but every cog has to work because we all have a part to play. And that's why from the top of the stack in the organization, 800-39's got 3 levels: organization, mission, business process, and system level. And you've got to be able to navigate up and down that triangle in order to really be successful in any organization, public or private sector.
Very inspiring, channeling the space race and then putting the man on the moon and basically dominating the space race. So looking forward at like the next big, technology, right? So like space travel, putting man on the moon. So looking forward, Augusta Delgado had actually asked a question. I'm going to rephrase it a little bit. He wants to know what we should expect from NIST guidelines for public AI systems. I'm not necessarily interested in what NIST's position is going to be on this, unless you'd like to comment on that. But I do want to preface it by saying Dr. Ross actually studied AI in 1990 during his PhD. So he's even more equipped to be able to talk about AI. And I don't want to spend a ton of time on AI because it seems like every conversation has got, AI heavy focus on it. But Ron, what are your thoughts about current state of AI and then really moving forward from a cybersecurity landscape perspective?
Artificial intelligence is such an interesting topic. Now at NIST, we have a whole group led by Elham Tabasi. She was the project leader for the AI risk management framework. So we were asked to develop that as part of, I believe it was legislation or an executive order. So she is really running that whole program. But from a cybersecurity perspective, AI, first of all, artificial intelligence has made such great strides in the past decade, largely because the computing power of the technology has gotten so good. The secondary storage devices, the things that we can, processing speed and the ability to store data has gone over the top. And the AI technology itself has made significant advancements, as has robotics. Back in the 1980s, it was a nascent technology. Things were just getting cranking in that point in time. But I look at AI from 2 perspectives. Certainly the adversaries can use AI to try to discover vulnerabilities. One of the things I mentioned is complex systems. That's our biggest threat. Why? Because we know our known vulnerabilities, because we stack those up every day. That set of known vulnerabilities gets bigger and bigger because the complex systems that we deal with. But the danger in complex systems is something called zero-day vulnerabilities. Those are the things that we don't know about that are lurking in that complexity, which will never get discovered. So the adversaries have an opportunity with artificial intelligence and machine learning to kind of go do a deeper dive on our systems to find out things that where those zero-day vulnerabilities might be. Well, the good news is we can do the same thing to them. So that's not a very satisfying place to be. You have to also remember that AI programs are programs. Programs operate at the application level. They operate above the operating system. If you look at the world of cybersecurity, I call it the stack. I use a metaphor called above the waterline, below the waterline. Above the waterline looks kind of like what the enterprise can do. You build a security program, you do the risk management framework, the cybersecurity framework, you select controls, you implement. But there's always a glass ceiling on the control implementation, because you can develop an incident response plan, a contingency plan. Those are things you can do. Any organization could do this. But if I asked you about your access control mechanisms and your 2-factor authentication or your encryption controls, what can you really tell me about those safeguards? All you can do is show me the commercial product where the vendor says, hey, you've got access control. Hey, you've got encryption. Or if you're lucky, it's gone through the FIPS 140 program, the CMBP program. But the point is, below the waterline is where industry plays. They're the ones developing the software, the firmware, the hardware, integration of all of those massive numbers of complex components. Below the waterline is the challenge, because the adversary gets low in the stack. It's like in football. If you're a lineman, they always tell you to get lower than your opponent. When you fire out, you want to get low and hit them low, because that's where you get the most leverage. Adversaries have the same thing. Artificial intelligence programs are operating at the application level. The adversaries get into your operating system or in the supply chain. They're already operating at a lower level, so they control basically what applications can execute. What's the output from an AI application? They can change that. The integrity, confidentiality, and availability. Those are the three pillars. Integrity is really critically important. If I can change the output of an AI system, you're going to be operating on false data, basically. So, that's why it's important to protect every aspect of the system stack from the top all the way down to the bottom, to include the integrated circuits and the supply chain. We've had several attacks over the past several years where the adversaries got into the development process, and they were able to actually masquerade and had the companies send out all of those updates to hundreds and thousands of customers signed that looked like they were legitimate. And the adversary had already been playing deep inside that supply chain in that organization. So the future is going to be twofold. We need to have people understand and continue to do the fundamentals above the waterline, which is largely 171, 853. But we also need to engage industry, and this is big now. You've heard a lot about the SBOM work, the bill of materials. Why do we care about SBOM? Well, if you go to the grocery store and you walk down the aisle and you pick up a cereal box, what does it tell you on the side of that box? How much sugar, cholesterol, fat? And that's important, because I'm going to be eating that stuff as I, go through my day.
Yeah.
How about medicines? What if somebody came to you and said, hey, I want you to eat this thing, or I want you to take this medicine. I'm not going to tell you how we developed it, what's inside it. Most people would say you're nuts. But yet, we buy any commercial product, it's delivered wide open. We don't know how it's configured. And it's a black box. Most people don't have a clue what's inside the smartphone and what's inside their tablet or that desktop, the laptop. And that's where we have a real problem. That's below the waterline. And until we can get better visibility and transparency, and that's not going to happen with commercial consumers. You can't expect people to understand, how systems are built and what a memory-safe programming language is. But we do need to have industry understand those things and ensure they're conveying to us, just like buying a car. I buy a new car, it's got airbags, steel reinforced doors, sensors, drop down, everything that helps protect me when I'm driving down the road at 70 miles an hour. But yet, that journey is not risk-free. Even with all that protective stuff, there is no such thing as a secure system. That's a buzzword. And why do we know that? Because you can't have a secure system when it's so complicated that you don't even know what's inside the black box. That's why we have to engage industry in this essential partnership. It's government, industry, and the academic community producing those next generation engineers, computer scientists, mathematicians, the people who develop next generation crypto, quantum. All of these things have to come together, because we can't hire all this expertise out. We've got to have a deep bench. And if you want to protect this country, we've got to commit to doing the heavy lifting and not just outsource that and hope that someone else is going to do it. That's why assurance, and I call that bringing the assurance receipts. Don't just tell me what functions you've implemented. Show me how you substantiate the claim that you've got two-factor or access controls or information flow controls or your crypto. If you can't bring the assurance receipts and you don't have the evidence that can substantiate that, then why should I believe anything? I'm flying blind. And flying blind, we used to have a thing called the blue screen of death. That may be before your time, Jerry, but come on,
Ron, look at me. I'm old.
Look, nobody died in the blue screen of death. But what happens if there's malicious code in that computer that's controlling my braking system, or my pacemaker in my chest with wireless access, or the power plant that's controlling the grid on the East Coast. You see, these are the things that really should be keeping people up at night. And most of the American people don't understand. There are people in our government that are worried about that, in the private sector. But I don't think the average person has a clue about how complex these systems really are and what it's going to take as a community to get our arms around this very complex. We've got technical debt that goes through a couple of decades now that we're going to have to deal with. So that's why everybody on this live stream today is so critical to the future of the country. We're indebted to you, and stay in for the fight long term. We need everybody in this fight.
Yeah, so much going on there. And, it's funny, on the streams, I will say hashtag the youngs, and then I'll explain to the youngs about something that they wouldn't know about because we lived it. So I think I just experienced what that is. But yeah, blue screen of death, I do got you. I will say, Ron, before I go on to the next question, I do love NIST. If I was going to get a tattoo on the knuckles, it would be NIST. But CISA does hold a close spot in my heart, and their Secure by Design initiative right now that they're really pushing on really does lend itself to what you're saying. One thing that I have been trying to promote, and I'm fully aware that it is a victory I'll never succeed with, is that I actually think our industry should be called cyber resiliency, not cyber security, simply for the fact that we can't actually secure. Like, all we really need to do is limit the likelihood and the impact of when we are hit. Be resilient as an organization, make the mission resilient, still get to the moon, even if you have, issues or whatever. So that's a personal mission that I'm on, trying to get the t-shirts made right now. But
right. Let me tell you, one of the things that my last two documents in the FISMA series, Vicky Piliteri, who's my colleague at NIST, took over most of the FISMA project right after we did Rev 5. And she's got a great vision for delivering content through the CPRT. Everything's going to be online, updated online, new requirements, new controls, all online, very accessible, different data formats for our customers. It's spectacular. So 800 and 172, the enhanced requirements following 171, and the 172 alpha, my last two pubs. But starting next year, and I've already started to work with several federal agencies. The primary one is NASA. What we're working on now, and this goes to your point, when I'm working with NASA now with their security and their systems engineers, and you talked about we should call our discipline cyber resiliency instead of cyber security. In reality, all of these things that we talk about, whether it's resilience, survivability, reliability, tamper resistance, all of those illities, security those are emergent properties that come out of an engineering process. Mm-hmm. So when you start the life cycle from your mission requirements, you go through a very detailed requirements engineering process. Start with high-level requirements, and NASA, all organizations, to include the DoD when they're building a new weapon system, start with the high-level requirements, and they keep on decomposing that till you come down to a set of build to requirements. Now, some of those requirements will be security requirements. Over the past 40 years, we've tried to put security into its own stovepipe. In reality, when you're working with NASA or the DoD, they have to have a system that can put steel on target. You've got to be able to launch the satellite, compete with the Russians or the Chinese, whoever you're going up against. You've got to innovate faster than they can, and you've got to make sure you can get steel on target or launch that satellite. Working with NASA now, what we're doing is we're taking the content of 800-160. Those are the core principles of how you build trustworthy systems. There is no such thing as a secure system. There is no such thing as, you can talk about secure by design, but the reason there's no such thing as a secure system is because it's too complicated. There's complexity theory in computer science, and you might have taken those courses. Automata theory. There's a limit to how much we can actually prove that's correct. It's just like in that automobile. All those safety features in the world, you still get in that car, and if you get into a head-on collision, hopefully you'll survive, but there's a high risk there. The one thing I can tell you is today, when you're doing a risk assessment, what are the four components? Threat, vulnerability, impact, and likelihood. There is a 100% likelihood if you're a high value asset or a critical program, that those adversaries are coming after you or are already embedded in your system, waiting for the opportune time to bring you down. So engineering is the only way out of this problem. NASA recognizes that. Their engineers, their system engineers, are going through, and I won't mention the system right now. We hope to announce it later once it becomes public, but we're working with those system engineers, bringing in the security requirements and content that NIST has developed, but we're using it in the life cycle. We're going at the mission requirements. Now, how many of those actually need to be security requirements to protect the mission? You've got to build the system correctly. It's got to be fit for purpose. It's got to be able to do what it's supposed to do. Verification, did I build it correctly? Validation, can I put steel on target? So as you're going through the life cycle, you're bringing in evidence that is going to be this I call the assurance receipts. How do I know I built it correctly? How do I know it can actually accomplish the mission? As you go forward in the life cycle, your security engineers are working side by side with the reliability engineers, the resilience engineers, and the system engineers, and NASA calls them the mission engineers. And they're doing things called trade space. You don't just get to show up with 100 controls and say, hey, we got to do these. You've got to say, okay, you want to encrypt that uplink, that satellite uplink? Well, what if the encryption process takes too long and you can't accomplish the mission? Well, if that's not time sensitive, guess what? That encryption requirement goes out the window. You were sitting there trading off things that are not essential to the mission accomplishment. Now, the other thing is that we've discovered is the adversaries are going deep into your systems. You might be deploying controls and doing requirements at a certain level in the system, and they've already figured out how to bypass those detection mechanisms. And so we need to get the engineers in there to understand where is the adversary playing in the stack, and how do I use defense in depth? If they get into my system, how can I ensure that I stop their lateral movement or I reduce their time on target? This is why we talk about a multi-dimension protection strategy. Dimension 1, stop them at the boundary if you can. But what if you can't stop them at the boundary? Well, what if they get inside your system? Then limit the damage they can do. We have a lot of ways by doing that with the architecture, decomposing things into security domains, virtualization techniques, reducing time on target. You have to go and kind of get in the middle of that attack sequence to cut it off so they don't have time on target and they don't have a chance to move laterally throughout the system. This is the world of 21st century cyber attacks. And a lot of that stuff is most people don't even think in those terms.
Yeah.
But there's a war going on below the waterline. And we've got to get down there and engage the adversary on their turf, on their terms, if we're going to win. Because once they take control at that level of the system, you can't get them out, you can't stop them, and we're going down. And that's not, I don't do that to kind of, kind of burn the house down here with people's hair on fire. But I do want to emphasize these things are very real. And so let's don't get hung up with buzzwords like secure by design. Now, there are a lot of things we can do to make these systems and applications more secure. Secure coding techniques, least functionality, least privilege, configuration management, dual authorization, checking the ports, protocols, services, and making sure you do all the minimization you possibly. What are you doing when you use least functionality? You're reducing complexity. And what does reducing complexity mean? It's reducing the attack surface. We cannot defend an attack surface that goes on forever and ever and ever. It may look nice, may have all the bells and whistles, but guess what? You're not in control anymore. And that's bad news that's going to keep on giving over and over and over again.
So really quick, Ron's talking about working with NASA. Just if you want, you can see I purchased this book in October. If you want, like basically I'll go as far as to say kind of a dummy guide on why doing cybersecurity in space is unbelievably challenging. This book is an awesome primer, Ron. I know you're probably well informed on the risks and challenges of operating on space missions, but that book, just as a quick aside, it really gives you an appreciation for like just all the complexities. You want to talk about like how much power the thing has. What if a solar panel doesn't deploy? How does it transmit data? Like it's crazy. So Ron, I wanted to, we're almost at time, but one question I really wanted to ask you, you've achieved so much in your career, from significant projects at NIST to receiving numerous prestigious awards, being on some really, really cool, opportunities. Can you share like what motivates you, what drives you, to continue to like just deliver excellence and pursue cybersecurity?
I do have the passion still, and as you say, I've done this such a long time, and I have such gratitude for everything that this country has given me the opportunity. I look at what I do every day is I serve the American people. I work for you. I work for all the people who are on this call today. The awards and all those things don't mean anything. The one thing that drives me every day is one word. It's called freedom. And it's living in a country that has allowed me to do everything that I've been able to do. And I've got 2 grandchildren now. They just had their 2nd and their 4th birthdays. Their birthdays on the same day, thank goodness, because I can't remember. But I look at them and I say, I want to be able to pass the world on to my grandchildren that is as safe and as secure as what was handed to me with the greatest generation, the World War II generation. You actually had to slug it out in the trenches. This month we're coming up on Memorial Day, and there are so many military people who gave the ultimate sacrifice, gave their lives to protect this country and to allow us to be free and to do things that we can do. No, we don't think about it every day. Memorial Day has become a holiday. We're out sort of barbecuing, we're enjoying our family time and all that. But when you think about how precious freedom is and how quickly it can be taken away, and how the world that we're facing in the 21st century is not going to be a kinetic world like we had to defend in the 20th century. The 21st century is going to be a kinetic warfare world, defending in cyberspace, defending the supply chain. We never had to do that before. Every person out there is kind of on the front lines of defending the country. It's just almost mind-boggling to think about those things. And so my perspective is one of gratitude. I'm thankful every day that I'm here and I'm able to still contribute. To me, retirement, as long as our bench is still kind of thin. That's why mentoring is important. Everybody who you can encourage to get into this wonderful profession, cybersecurity, someone's going to be able to look back 40 years from now, who's maybe listening as a young student today, looking back 40 years from now on the next generation of challenges. There'll always be new challenges and new things we have to do. And we've never, ever kind of steered clear of a difficult and challenging time. And we're clearly facing that now. But I have such confidence in this country and the people that are part of this, live stream today. We have a great country. We have great people, our diversity, all the things that make us great. That's what really motivates me and why I get up every day and put on the pants one leg at a time and go at it one more time.
I love it. And so many people, thanking you for your service. And I think actually when I was promoting this episode coming up all week, I did talk about your contributions in your public service and just how impactful it's been. You, Dr. Ross, have enabled many, many organizations, many, many missions to be more secure because you've basically given us the tools in order to achieve that. So personally, on behalf of like many, 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 many businesses and organizations, thank you for the work that you've done, you and your team. I know you've got a very talented team always working with you there. Ron is on LinkedIn. I didn't ask you this, Ron, but it's a public social media site. Is that the best way? Like if people wanted to like connect with you or follow your posts in order to see your contributions and your work with 171, 172 and the other efforts?
Yeah, I use LinkedIn a lot for writing articles that, are not really ready for NIST primetime yet, but there's some of my thoughts. I talk a lot about this multi-dimension protection strategy. LinkedIn is a great place to read the articles. I talk about resilience, systems security engineering, all the things that are kind of the hard topics that we haven't been engaged as much on. So you'll see those on LinkedIn. They're really short and they're a good primer for some of the things that you can get into deeper, like in the 800-160, volume 1, volume 2. certainly all the RMF publications, and we've got other great documents in so many different areas. I've got so many great colleagues. They work in just a plethora of areas at NIST. And again, their dedication, my hats off to all of them as well. And, so again, thank you, Jerry, for giving me an hour of your time. And thank you for all the people who joined today. I know your time is very valuable. And I hope giving you a couple of tidbits and stay engaged. We don't have a lot of time to get this right. And therefore, every day that goes by, every minute that we can engage in and just make the problem, make the solution a little bit better. Every day, take 2 steps forward. Even if you take 1 step back, you're still moving forward. And that's all that matters.
Very inspiring. Great send off, Dr. Ross. This hour went incredibly fast. I got to tell you, you inspired me. I know you've inspired others in the audience. You've grounded the work that people are doing to really take perspective and understand and appreciate the larger impact and the greater good that it's doing for our country and for, our businesses and the missions that we serve. So I want to thank you for that. We are at time. We're a couple minutes over. So I do want to say on behalf of the entire community, you guys showed out today. Great questions. I didn't get to all the questions. So potentially if Dr. Ross had a great experience, maybe we can trick him into coming back onto the show later on, maybe in the fall or something like that, and get some more questions answered to him. But on behalf of everybody, Dr. Ross, thank you so much for taking time and sharing all of your experiences and thoughts with us today. It was very, very awesome.
Thanks, Jerry. Take care, everybody. Have a good day.
Absolutely. All right, everybody. Really quick before you bounce out of here, I want to remind all of you that this right tonight at 7 p.m., you can see here, if you're studying for your Security Plus, Slay Security Plus goes live at 7 p.m. Jesse Johnson, Cosmic Cowboy, alongside Chris Whitlock as special guest today. If you're studying, it's great community. It's Simply Cyber community members. It's Slay Security Plus community members. It's all about good times. Go check it out on the Slay Security Plus YouTube channel. Guys, I hope you got a great experience. I really genuinely appreciate everybody's respect, time, energy, effort, and focus. It was a great stream. If you showed up late, definitely go back and watch the whole thing. I think you're going to really, really enjoy the conversation that we had with Dr. Ross. Guys, that's going to do it for Simply Cyber Live. Thanks so much. And until next time, stay secure. Content. Keep the cybersecurity train going by connecting with the other Simply Cyber community resources. We have the Discord server that's lively and always keeps the conversation going. You can connect with me directly on LinkedIn. And also every single weekday morning on the Simply Cyber channel, we're doing live daily cyber threat briefings, 8 a.m. Eastern time, as well as Thursday at 4:30 p.m. We're doing live stream interviews with industry experts, and we produce videos that we push out every Wednesday morning. I'm Jerry from Simply Cyber. I hope you enjoyed the content, and we'll